Welcome to the OverAnalyzers. I'm Dan. I'm here with Mike, and I'm drinking a whiskey. Mike, what are you drinking?
Also a whiskey.
All right, cheers.
Oh.
All right. During this week, we got a question from Ronnie in our Discord, sort of about what we were talking about last week. He said, "I assume you like drawing. I assume Mike likes software development. I like what I do. So if we like what we are doing, then why are we being tempted or distracted to do something else? When you work for a longer period of time, you start getting exhausted, so you start feeling you need to have a break. This is okay, I think. It's not, I want to go on Reddit, but rather, I want to stop doing what I'm doing now and just lay back and do whatever. Then you can also get distracted by some external direct stimuli, like a message sound or email notification, and this can be addressed by adjusting your environment. But what I meant with my question is this third kind of distraction, where you are working on something and you don't feel tired yet, but your mind just kind of, on its own, wanders off and starts suggesting things like, let's just check some quick YouTube video or something. I mean, if you are doing what you like doing, you should be having enough fun not to do anything else, right?"
Yeah. Um, so obviously that's a fantastic question, and I think in general it gets you thinking about the idea of focus and why is it that sometimes you're able to focus? Why does it work really well sometimes? Why does it fail sometimes? Like there's a lot of different reasons why you are unable to keep your focus on the thing that you want it to be on. So I think what Ronnie is asking is about one in particular, which is why is it that, you're not tired, you've kind of gotten into something, and then your mind keeps wanting to go somewhere else. I think it's probably worth talking about a lot of the different reasons why that happens, but I think the one that he's talking about, a couple people had some really good answers for this in Discord, so this isn't really even new from what they were saying, but in general, I think that your mind prefers a fairly low energy state. Like if you think about focus for a second, right? There's different, you can be focused on one thing and we generally consider that to be good, but there's another dimension to it, which is how hard is the thing that you're focusing on, right? When you're focused on something, you're leveraging your short-term memory. Like you're putting things into your mind and kind of holding them there. And if you're working on something hard or trying to solve a problem, you're having to put a lot of things in there, and in some cases hold them there, keep these facts in your brain, which can be difficult. And then you're trying to reason about them. You're trying to recall things out of your mind to make connections, and you're, really having to bring your mind about to do some difficult things. And that's just hard. That's a hard thing to do. And so you'll find that happening pretty often if you're working on something where you get that feeling of, this is hard. And your mind generally likes to be not stressed. I mean, that's kind of how your body is too. You want to just lay around. You don't want to necessarily go run. Like you have to kind of get yourself to do that. So if you're bumping up against a high energy state or having to do difficult things with your mind, the tendency is to want to find something that's just easier. So even if you're doing something you like, and this happens to me all the time, I'll be working on something that I enjoy, maybe a project that I really care about, that I'm like, cool, I like this. But there is some force in my head that is constantly trying to push me into something that's a lower energy state. I mean, if you think about scrolling through Reddit or something like that, you're never asked to put things together and recall information or anything like that. In fact, most of the time, the part of the reason why it's so instantly gratifying is that you're presented something and you're almost told an opinion. Like, look what these people did. Aren't they stupid? You agree, right? Like there's no connections, there's no higher energy state. It's like the lowest common denominator. So I think just in general, for that specifically, there's always this gravity towards simpler, easier to focus on type of things. But I don't know. What's your experience?
Well, I definitely think that's one side of it. But if you think about it in more like way simpler terms, why does our mind wander? when we're doing something that we really like to do? And I think the answer is because we don't want to die.
Okay.
Like if you think about primitive humans and just, I don't know, humans in general, I mean, your brain always has to be listening. It always has to wander. Your ability to be distracted is what keeps you alive. If you were really focused on this call and then someone walked in your room with a gun, if you were unable to pick up on that stimulus, you could just be shot and killed.
I'm hoping you would let me know.
I might tell you, but if I'm too focused, maybe I wouldn't be able to. But our brains have that ability to keep listening and keep wandering, searching for threats and searching for rewards just all the time.
That's a really fascinating look at it. You know, we compared it to food a lot before, like, oh, you know, crappy or easy things like browsing social media or something is kind of like sugar, and that, you know, you just want sugar, you don't really want like this rich micronutrient dense meal. But I think the reasoning is kind of the same, right? Like if you're out there surviving, you want all the calories you can get. So something sweet is calorie dense, so you're kind of wired to want it, because from a survival perspective, if food is scarce, you want the most calorie dense thing you can find.
Right. So I think everyone, including us, you typically treat distractions as these very negative things that or like these weeds that you're trying to pull out of your garden, and you're trying to keep it perfect. But it's not actually quite like that. You will get distracted no matter what at any time, because you have to, because you're a human. And if you didn't get distracted, or if you weren't capable of being distracted, then you're not normal. Like something is very wrong with you. That's a very unique trait that your brain has, is being able to pay attention to all of these other things that are going on. The problem lies in when you are really trying to get something done. There's like a hierarchy of things that you need to pay attention to. If you're going into battle, okay, say you're a knight and you're going into battle, you grab your sword and you put all your armor on first, you know, your armored boots and I don't know, everything, your giant helmet and whatever. And then you grab your sword and you jump on your steed and go off into battle. What you don't do is, I don't know, stop along the way into battle to go talk to a friend about something, or stop at the market and buy an apple, or talk to a pretty girl, or...
Right, like mostly you're thinking about this battle or you might die.
Yeah, exactly. But because you are focused on this very important thing, like this is a task that needs to be done. So you have this hierarchy of things that you pay attention to. So like when I go to draw or to get some stuff done, like I get dressed and I get ready, you know, I grab my coffee, I sit down, like everything is set up, and that kind of has over time trained my brain to know that it's time to focus. It's time to ignore some of those smaller things that don't matter.
Okay, that I like a lot. That simple idea right there. I'm gonna use this as an example again. My dog. If you observe dog behavior, I think you can learn a lot about human behavior. If you're trying to teach Guster, my dog, something new, like say you have this new thing, new behavior you're trying to get him to learn, and so you have treats and you have everything set up, and you're like, okay, I want you to, I don't know, like or we teach him leave it, right? We did that at some point. Like there's something like a piece of food in the ground, you have to teach him to ignore it, and then he'll come to you and get food, something like that. When you first start trying to do that with him, even though you're rewarding him a lot and you're being really encouraging, he gets really excited, and then he gets really overwhelmed, and he'll start to almost whine and like get upset, and he just wants to stop if you do it for too long, because it's new, it's unfamiliar, and he like just has a hard time doing that thing. There's a lot of like new stimulus in his head. But if it's a familiar behavior, then he loves it. He'll do it all the time. Like we play this game called Find It, where you hide some treats around the house and then tell him to find it, and he loves it. He's all about it. He wants to do that every time. There's this little like mini park in our neighborhood, and for some strange reason, like when I take him for a walk, we cross the street all the time, like different streets, and that we just walk across the street. But if we're going to that little mini park, we have to sprint across the street, because probably I did that one time, like a car was coming, and so we sprinted, and that just became like the thing that we do. And that's just every single time when we're going from the side of the street to that mini park, we have to sprint there. Point being, once a behavior is established, like all the mental stress for him goes away. He's not having to put things together and be unsure of himself. It's just this like automated process that just happens, and he loves it. It's super easy for him. And I've found some of the same things with me. I think like what you're saying, where if you build a routine that's sort of predictable, and the outcome is that if I'm going to read, say I'm picked up a new book and I haven't read in a while. At first, I'm like, reading. I don't, it's like I start reading it and I'm like, I'm getting distracted and I just can't get my mind to sit on it. But if I start to get into that routine a little bit where it's like, oh, in the evenings, Sam goes to bed, I'm out in the living room for the next hour, I read on my little e-reader thing, and that's just what I do every night, then it's effortless. Like it just becomes this thing that I do every evening. And I think that the same logic applies to a lot of stuff. If you remove the newness of it, where your mind is like unfamiliar and you've like kind of ingrained that habit of this is what we're doing, we're going to focus on this, I think it becomes a lot easier for your mind to rest on that thing.
So the other thing I was thinking is that I almost feel like we shouldn't think in terms of focusing or not focusing, because it doesn't really work like that. And there's a lot of different phases for anything that you do, where sometimes you have to really focus hard on it, and other times you don't have to focus really hard, but you're still doing the thing. Like if you think about driving, I mean, there's a couple things you got to think about when you first get in the car. You make sure you have gas, whatever, and you have to make sure you know where you're going. But say you're on, a 10-hour trip, and you've been on the road for 4 hours on a totally open road where nothing's really happening. You're still focused on driving. You're still driving, right? And you're focused as much as you need to be. But then your mind is totally off somewhere else.
You're listening to a podcast. You're talking to somebody or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So would you label that as not focusing, or would you label that as focusing but not that hard? Or it's not like a yes or no thing. And there's plenty of times where I'm painting where sometimes you have to really focus and problem solve and all that, but then there's plenty of other times where it's just like that open road, and I'm painting, I'm not even really conscious of it, but my brain's just kind of cycling through all these things, and it's kind of peaceful, and it's not like this stressful focus thing, you know?
Okay, here's kind of a different way of saying that, I guess. I mean, obviously there are certain things. Let's say you're working on a painting, you're trying to push your skills, right? Like you're working on figure drawing and you're trying to do better than you have before and really buckle down, right? So that's a moment where you really need to focus. If you're distracted and half paying attention, you're not going to do the best drawing you've ever done, right? So there's clearly times when you want the better you can focus, the better off you are, basically. The deeper, the more singular your focus, the better. But I've found I've had days where I'm working on something where I'm pretty focused and I might really push myself hard, and I'll be really focused for a long time, and then I get to the end of the day and I'm like, I'm toasted. I mean, I can barely function anymore, and usually I'm having a hard time the day after, or maybe I'm focused for 2 days and then I'm wrecked for the rest of the week. Like, I do think that there is fatigue that happens when you're extremely focused, and it's probably not the best to hope that you're intensely focused on something 24/7. I think you do want more relaxed focus at times, because it's similar to lifting weights, right? Like you can't lift for 12 hours a day. You go lift really hard and then you're done and you have to relax.
So I think, you should try to focus and make sure you're not being distracted constantly. But it's almost more beneficial to think about it in different like mind states.
Hmm.
I was working out a few hours ago, and I do a set, and then I open up my phone and I was like changing the song or something, and then I ended up messaging you about something, and then I was checking my notes, and then I had to go inside and look at something, and I walk into my living room, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't want to work out anymore. Like, I'm done with that. I want to
Yeah.
go relax, grab a snack or something. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And I try to like snap out of it and go back to working out. I kind of got to build back up, and then I'm working out again. And then I kind of do the same thing. And it's like, well, I'm not switching to a bad mind state. It's just not the one that I need right now. It's like, I don't have to be super focused to work out. I mean, if I was really pushing it, you do, but it's just kind of a routine workout thing. So I'm working out and I'm totally fine. And then it switches to this different mind state, which is a good one.
Hmm.
I'm starting to focus on something else. I'm, going through my notes, thinking about stuff. And that's like a different mind state. And then I go inside, and all of a sudden I'm conditioned to sort of feel relaxed in my living room. So I feel relaxed. I don't want to work out anymore. And it's like three great mind states. I need all of them in my life, but not back to back, and not while I'm trying to achieve this thing. And so I was focused on all three of them inside of them, but I don't know. There's this other element of like,
Yeah.
I from the viewpoint of working out, I'm getting distracted, but I don't know.
Well, okay, what about this? So when I lift, like I, for the most part, do powerlifting, which often enough means that you do a heavy set that in some cases is really heavy and really intense. And it's like, I mean, your mind can't focus on anything else. It's very much
Right.
that kind of going into battle type of feeling. And then sometimes you have a break that's like 6 minutes long or 8 minutes long. I mean, you're literally just doing nothing. It's the opposite of like circuit training. I mean, you're just like, okay, I'm going to sit and do nothing for 8 minutes.
Right.
And then you do another set that maybe lasts 30 seconds, but it's super intense. And I found that what I like to do, what I think feels the best, is where I lift really hard and focus very intently on that. And then I sit on the floor, or maybe I walk around a little bit and I read. I just read some novel. And I'm distracted in the sense that I'm not like sitting there thinking about lifting, but I'm also not sending my mind in a million directions. It's just sitting there
Right.
doing one thing. And that to me feels pretty good. It's like I get into this really intense, high energy state and then calm down and focus my mind on this one thing and relax. And I feel more relaxed. And then I kind of get a little bit more amped back up, do the lift again, so on. That feels really good to me. What doesn't feel good is when I do this lift, it's really intense. And then I would call this getting distracted, in the sense that like my attention gets pulled in different directions that I wasn't intending it to. Maybe that's the distinction there. Like distraction is where your mind's going where you weren't wanting it.
Yeah.
Right? Like I'm on the internet, I'm scrolling through Instagram, I'm becoming outraged at some post of some horrible thing that happened somewhere, and then something else. And like that
Right.
to me, even though I'm in a much more relaxed state of mind, it doesn't feel good. And it kind of leads to that same thing where when I go back to lift, it's like, oh, yeah, lifting. Oh, okay, I guess I got to do this. And it's like my mind was, I wouldn't say it's happy being distracted, but like it wants to kind of stay in distracted, nothing matters land.
Right.
And I think there's a pretty big difference between those two things. Like I'm relaxed in both cases in a sense, but one is distracted where my attention is being pulled in directions that I wasn't really wanting it to. And the other is where I'm simply resting my attention on something that's simple and relaxing. Like it's not demanding. I'm not having to, do a lot of difficult reasoning. But it's one thing, and it's what I want it to be on.
Right. And okay, the worst days for me are when I wake up and I'm ready to be really focused, but I don't have a clear plan, and so I end up like heavy focusing on like a million different things, and I end up in that same cycle of, well, it's like the fish where you drop the fish into the tank and it's not acclimated, it kind
Yeah.
of just dies. It's like taking your brain and putting it into a bunch of different fish tanks without acclimating, and
Yeah.
it gets really stressful. And even though you have all of this like all this energy that you're ready to focus on something, it's just there isn't a clear path for you to take, or you don't have a clear plan, or you don't really know what it is you want to do. You just know that you want to get something great done, and you just can't do it. You keep bouncing around. It's like your brain keeps wandering in the background, and because it doesn't have a clear plan, it starts chasing everything that looks like a reward, or every flashy thing that comes along. You're like, oh no, that's what I should be doing. So you run and you chase that. Those are the worst kinds of days.
Yeah.
And I can't, if I've gotten like halfway through the day, I can't snap out of that. It's very difficult to.
Yeah. The way I've heard that described, and I like this, I think, is a top-down focus versus bottom-up focus. So top-down focus is that, you know, you decide, I want my mind to do this, and then you do it. And that's top-down. And then bottom-up is, oh, ding, my phone, something went off. Oh, it's a notification for Clash of Clans. I have to open my chest that's been whatever. Like, that's bottom-up focus. Something is demanding your attention that you weren't intending to, and so you become focused for however long on this thing that just sort of came up. I think, like, as a very simple general rule, I think bottom-up focus is pretty much just bad.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yes, generally, yes. But you also need to be able to adapt to things. And if you really feel like doing something that's not on your schedule, then you may want to take advantage of that right in the moment. Like if you, you know, because you could be working opposite to your schedule. I mean, as a general rule, yes, absolutely. You should always, or most of the time, aim for top down, where you are controlling the schedule. But at the same time, you have to be able to adapt to things.
Well, okay, right. Like if a guy with a gun walks in my room, I can't be like, look, that's bottom up.
I have a schedule, dude.
Yeah, like we got something here. So you know, obviously you have to respond to your environment in some cases. And here's another thing that I wanted to bring up. One thing I've noticed, one of the reasons why my attention gets pulled away is sometimes I'm fatigued. You know, I've been focused on something for a long time. Maybe it's something I really enjoy and I want to keep doing it. But I will notice that my attention will start to, it's almost not even getting distracted. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's almost like it just kind of slips. Like my eyes just kind of go a little bit cross-eyed and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, here I am. And I think it's just my mind is tired and it isn't able to really focus on the thing in front of me anymore. And fatigue, I sometimes you got to get stuff done, right? So you might be fatigued and you just have to kind of get through it because of your job or because of whatever reason. But in general, if you're trying to learn and you're trying to get good at something, I think that's basically just something to avoid. Where if your attention begins to slip and it's just too tired to be focused, then you're at risk of getting into, you know, bad town where you get really fried and then you go through sometimes days or even weeks where you like can't function. That's certainly happened.
Do you think that, I mean, we have learned that your brain can actually, or it does, like certain areas will grow the more you use it, like the cabbies and everything.
Right.
And that is super interesting. But it also,
by cabbies, you're referring to London cabbies that we have heard research about, where they learned the map of the city and their brain physically changed because of that effort. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes. Which would suggest that using that part of the brain puts a lot of stress on it. Enough stress to make it grow. I'm sure there's a lot more science to it, but it's sort of like a muscle. And I wonder if you have an extremely intense day where you have focused really hard, I wonder if it's even possible to repeat that the next day or two. Like I'm sure it varies a lot from person to person and just what that intense focus actually was, but because I've experienced this where I'll work really, really hard on a piece for a a week or 2 weeks or something. Then afterwards, I am
Mm-hmm.
so fried and just done.
Yeah.
And to the point where I physically can't do something else right away. And I wonder if it is actually something neurological like that, where
I clearly not a neurologist, but I would not be surprised at all.
like
Well,
if you
okay.
do your max,
Yeah.
deadlift or something, you can't do it again the next day, right? I mean,
Well, okay. We're low on time, so I'm not going to get too far into it. But there is, so generally, most people would say 100%, you can't do that. You max out, you're tired, you're fatigued, and you have to recover. But there are actually some training styles that do that, or very close to that. You get close to your max every day. And it leverages something called the repeated bouts effect, which is where if you do something that's really hard and it stresses you out, at first it's really hard and it stresses you out and you're really fatigued the next day. But if you continue to do that thing, like if it's the same thing, it just stresses you out less. Where you actually can, if you get adapted to it, you can at least near max every day. And it's not the Bulgarian weightlifting team was famous for this. They would actually max once or twice a day, just indefinitely, and they became the dominant champions of the Olympics for a long time. And that was considered like something that nobody did. Anyway,
well,
there's some,
I wonder if it's like that for
yeah,
your brain. I mean, I'm sure it is, but
I
we just don't recognize it.
yeah. I imagine it is relatively similar to what we know about exercise and lifting, is that if you do a really, really intense effort, like overtraining is a real thing. You can exhaust yourself and you can just be fried for some length of time after that. Like that's universally acknowledged as real. But there is some idea that you could do these really intense efforts. They're fairly short. They're intense, but they're not very long. And you can do those repeatedly if you kind of become adapted to that. I don't know, but I imagine you could, if you were careful with it, you could adapt to where you could focus very intensely every day and then relax and let your focus rest on something simpler over time.
I like that idea. I also like the idea of, I don't know. I mean, I know we all say like, oh, well, take a break if you're exhausted, go have fun, relax,
Yeah.
whatever, it's good for you. But like, you can't see what's going on in your brain. So you're kind of just in the dark feeling around hoping, that you're doing the right thing. And it would be cool to know more about that.
It would. Well, the one rule that I have come up with for myself along those lines, because you really don't know, is that if I feel my focus slipping, not distracted, not the thing that Ronnie was talking about where, I'm doing something, it's fun, and it's like, oh, I want to go browse Reddit. Not that. If I'm really focused on something and I start to feel it to where I kind of have that little cross-eyed moment of, whoa, oh yeah, okay, here's the thing that I'm doing. It's like my focus just kind of falls away and then comes back. That is a very, very clear sign that I need to stop. Like that is a peace out, go do something else. You're fatigued type of thing.
Right.
And it happens before I'm angry or frustrated or tired, like consciously tired. I'll just notice that, oh, wait a minute, I just zoned out for half a second there. That to me is a very clear sign that I got to stop. And I've been trying to really respect that and live by that. And that's been very helpful. So that's my one small piece of insight into what's happening in your brain, I think. Like it's been useful for me.
What was the Starcraft like filter thing that you came up with that you were talking about the other day?
Filter thing.
Like if you win 3 games, you keep going.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
Or if you
Okay, so if I lose 3 games in a row, I have to mandatory break. If I win 3 games in a row, mandatory not break. Mandatory have to keep playing. And that's what I've called winner's tilt, which is where you get kind of excited and then you want to leave, which is a strange thing, but that's what happens. And I've noticed that in all areas of my life.
It's like you want to walk away with a win, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to risk ruining that.
Yeah, but that's the worst possible time because likely I'm playing really well. Like I'm on my A game, everything is clicking, and that's when I have an opportunity to really push my limits and get into some new territory of, oh, I'm playing better than I ever have before. So that's the worst time to take a break. But then on the contrary to that, after losing a bunch in a row, that's when I want to keep playing. Like I just want to mindlessly grind my way through it. Very similar to this, like a gambling thing. Like you've lost and you just want to keep pulling the lever in the slot machine. Like I'm gonna get it back. I'm gonna get it back,
Right.
and that's the worst time to play. And that I think corresponds to potentially many things, but focus being lost is definitely one of them.
Well, I really like that idea of kind of coming up with equations that sort of protect you from falling into those really big traps
Yeah.
of exhausting your brain and running yourself into the ground.
I mean, the problem for me is that I've had to make up these weird rules, like the 3 wins, keep playing, 3 losses, leave. If my focus slips, I have to take a break, stuff like that, because I don't recognize it when it's happening. No matter how much I want to, I'll start playing worse. I'll start getting, like, things start to go wrong well before it really shows up, where I go, oh man, I'm super angry or frustrated or tired and I gotta stop. Like at that point, it's kind of too late. So the weird little rules and things I think are very helpful for that reason. Like it helps me mitigate this stuff that I can't really detect by emotions. Like the emotions lag behind what is actually happening.
well, yeah, you are when you're in there focusing, like there's no way for you to be objective about it. And you can't even recognize those same patterns you fall into
Yeah.
when you're in them until like the next day or you get out of it. But so how do you think people, or how do you think I or you can better train ourselves to focus better? Like what are some ways that you have found
I mean,
to push yourself, like
yeah.
the lifters that kind of push themselves to the max? Like how do you even get to that point where you can sort of push yourself like that?
I mean, I'm again not an expert and I have a long way to go with myself, but what I have found for me, and this might just be my preference, like I'm a power lifter because that's what I like. I like the idea of doing something really, really intense for a short period of time. I'm not an endurance athlete, right? So maybe it's different for different people. But for me, I like the idea of very intense efforts that are very short, and then you relax. And I kind of like that idea for focus-based things too. Like it depends on what you're doing, right? If you're, painting your house, you're not going to focus intensely for 10 minutes and then not if you're trying to get a house
Right.
painted. Okay, so it depends. But if it's solving problems or trying to like reason about things or do something really difficult, I like the idea of trying to set yourself up and then focus intensely and then stop. And you usually have to stop before you kind of want to. That's what I've been finding.
I have found, like, doing the Pomodoro stuff, and I kind of wish I was a little more strict about it, but I'm not,
Mhm.
and I kind of use it when I need to, and then other times I don't do it.
Yeah.
But I have found that, say the timer goes off at 20 or 25 minutes, and I want to keep working. If I do that, I burn myself out to the point
Yeah.
where I can't do it again. Like maybe I can do it. Maybe I can focus really hard for 45 minutes or whatever, like straight as one block at time. But if I do that, I'm unable to do it again. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, if you don't take that break, like you burn yourself out faster.
One of the
So
things that
I agree with you.
yeah, I actually, so I am kind of the same. I use a Pomodoro technique sometimes and then not others, but I think probably the most valuable thing of the Pomodoro technique for me is is having to stop, even though I don't want to. You would think that it's this way of getting yourself to start. Like, oh, okay, well, I'll just do 25 minutes. That'll get me going. That's not so overwhelming. To me, that's not the most valuable part. The most valuable part is forcing yourself to stop, even though you don't want to, for I think 2 reasons. One, we just don't really respect the fact that that fatigue is a real thing and it builds up over time. So if you're just intensely focused and you're like, man, I feel great. I'm super focused. I've been doing this for 7 hours. Well, in a few days, you're going to be a mess. Or at least I will. Like, I know that, but we just never really have that in the moment. So forcing yourself to take breaks, even though you don't want to, I think is really valuable. In the same way that you can't just bench press for an hour. Like, you got to do sets. You got to, let your body recover a little bit. You got to let your mind recover. But I think the more important thing for me is that what I tend to do if I'm working on something is I will stop when I'm stuck. I'll work on it and I'll work on it, and then I'll get into something that I can't figure out, and I'll beat my head against the wall for a while, and sometimes get really frustrated and like, okay, I gotta take a break, and then I leave, which is terrible because it's a lot of fatigue. And then I come back to this problem that I don't want to have to deal with, which is not a good thing for procrastination purposes, right?
Or you don't come back.
Or
because you
yeah,
don't
right.
want to come back. Yeah.
Exactly, right. Like, I'm leaving myself this gross mess to return to. If you're forced to take breaks, you're basically stopping at a random time, which is way better than stopping at the worst time. Like, you're working for 25 minutes. A lot of the time you're like, but I have this thing. Like, I know how to do this. I just gotta code up this little part here and it's all gonna work and it's gonna be really exciting. That's a freaking fantastic thing to come back to after a break. You definitely come back after that break. You're like, cool, 5 minutes is up. Now I'm gonna finally see it all work. Like, that's a great thing to leave for yourself. But if you're doing the opposite of only leaving this gross, disgusting, here's this horrible problem that I already spent 2 hours on and can't figure out, that's a terrible way to come back. That to me is the most valuable part of time boxing, or the Pomodoro technique.
I have heard of artists, the good ones. They say leave, and I totally forgot about this, but they say leave like the funnest highlight for the next day. So in the morning you're just like really excited to go do that thing, and then you're like you're into it again.
Yeah, I don't always do this, but I should do this more because I think it's great. I have a to-do list with all this stuff, and I have like some section that is the nasty things, and then I have whatever. But usually I will, when I'm finishing the day, I will find something that I think is really easy or is going to be really enjoyable, and I'll put that on the top of the to-do list and say, when back, do this. I'm like basically trying to bait myself, like convince future me to get back to this thing, because look, there's this really easy thing that you can do and it'll be great and it's exciting. That's a pretty good way to get back into something.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably why some of the great artists, or that's a little piece of why some of the great artists are great, is because they've figured themselves out and they know how to get themselves to do good work consistently over time.
I think the really frustrating thing about our brains is that if you're working out, you can look at yourself in the mirror and see improvement, or you can step on a scale and get instant feedback. With our brains, it's not like we weigh our brains, or it's not like we walk into the scanner and say, hey, look, it's going really well. Like, I'm learning stuff. Like, it only shows in direct results. You only know you're improving if you are getting like very seeable results. And that's really frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an extremely good point. Like, with your body, you can measure it pretty easily. I mean, whether that's weight or strength, how many pull-ups can you do? What's the number? Is the number higher or lower than it used to be? With your brain, like, you're doing diverse things that you don't directly compare. You aren't like taking an IQ test every day or something. That wouldn't make sense anyway.
It's so hard to quantify.
Yeah.
But what's really happening is very physical. Like, there's neurons doing stuff, and like there's actual stuff in your brain that's happening, and yet we will blame ourselves for not being able to do something, or not being able to focus longer, or whatever it is. Like, I don't know. Like, we wouldn't do that with our bodies. We wouldn't be like, why can't I lift 600 pounds today? Like, I tried really hard. Well, maybe you could. I couldn't.
No, I cannot.
Like, why can't I
cannot
just
lift
go out
600
there?
pounds on any lift? Not yet.
Okay. Well, maybe next week. But
no,
like,
you're right.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't expect myself to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I know the steps that I need to do in order to get there, but with my brain, it's like.
Yeah, with your
I don't know
mind,
what my limits are. Yeah.
it's always guilt and shame, which is the conclusion that we draw. If you go do pull-ups for a while and you're like, wow, I did 100 pull-ups. I'm tired now. I can't do anymore. It's probably because I did 100 pull-ups and now I'm tired.
Right.
But with your mind, you're like, oh, I can't focus anymore. It's because I suck and I'm dumb and whatever.
Right. Yeah. But
yeah,
really,
it's like we have no respect for it.
Yeah. Or we just had no knowledge of it. I mean, it's hidden away in some research papers by some scientist who told like 6 of his friends and published a paper that no one read. But like the answers are there. Like people have
well, kind of. I mean, we've read a fair amount of papers and whatnot on that sort of thing. It's never a whole picture. But well, okay, 2 things. One, we always get mad at ourselves when we're unable to focus for a long period of time, which doesn't really make sense if you compare it to something like exercise. But also, we have this fantasy that we can just turn it on overnight. Like, wow, I've been a total wreck for the past 3 months, but today I'm going to be hyper focused and do everything amazingly. You wouldn't think that way for bench pressing. You wouldn't be like, well, I haven't touched a barbell in 3 months or longer, but today I'm going to bench press 400 pounds. That's just absurd, and everyone knows it's absurd. And if you want to bench press 400 pounds, you're going to spend probably 20 years trying to get to that point. So, let's all try to understand ourselves better and learn how to focus better over time and eventually be really good at it. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Leave us a comment, hang out with us on Discord, or email us at the OverAnalyzers podcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week.